At the foot of a mountain lined with densely packed houses, laborers toiled over a strange, sticky substance. Among them, a curious young girl dipped her finger into the mixture, mistaking it for candy. She eagerly licked it, only to be shoved aside by a frustrated worker. Observing the scene with disdain, the protagonist, Li Huang, reprimanded her firmly. He remarked that it wasn't candy, it was medicine, and criticized how the people in that place never seemed to understand the difference. Around him, the atmosphere felt disturbingly devoid of morality. The townspeople behaved like those possessed, as if gripped by some silent madness. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. A white-haired girl was being harassed by an older man who had seized her. With a twisted grin, he taunted her, saying he wanted to play with her body. Her desperate cries for help were ignored, while the onlookers laughed cruelly at her suffering. Infuriated by the scene, Li Huang grabbed a nearby tool and hurled it at the man, striking him in the head. The girl, trembling in fear, immediately rushed to hide behind him. Bleeding and furious, the injured man warned Li that he would pay with his life once the master heard what he'd done. But Li, unfazed, declared boldly that he wasn't afraid of the master. His defiance left the entire crowd in stunned silence. A guard then appeared, announcing that the master had summoned both Li Huang and the girl who had earlier mistaken the substance for candy. Overjoyed, the girl began dancing, convinced that the master would reward her with more candy. Meanwhile, the injured man sneered at Li, convinced that this summons meant his end. As they prepared to leave, the white-haired girl, still shaken, clutched Li's clothes and whispered a warning. She begged him not to go, claiming it was dangerous. Li, however, continued walking in silence, his expression firm, while the girl watched him go with a fearful gaze. As they descended the mountain, Li Huang reflected on his recent outburst. He questioned himself, wondering why he had let his emotions take over so easily. Just as he tried to steady his thoughts, the candy-obsessed girl playfully pushed him. Irritated, he told her to stop, but she simply smiled and offered him what she called candy, though he now understood it was some kind of medicine. Saying nothing, he accepted it. Beaming with innocence, she told him that the master was kind because he always gave them plenty of candy. Eventually, they arrived at the master's place. A large pot boiled over an open flame, emitting a strange aroma. The girl respectfully bowed and thanked the master for calling her. The master's grin was grotesque, his face stained with blood. Without warning, he grabbed the girl and hurled her into the boiling pot. Despite the horrific scene unfolding, the girl remained lost in her delusion, believing she was part of the candy-making process. The master began twisting her limbs and crushing her bones as she was boiled alive. Li stood frozen, paralyzed by shock. The horrifying realization sank in. This so-called medicine was made from human remains. As the master tossed the girl's mangled body into a cauldron and shouted for a hotter fire, Li broke down. In disbelief, he whispered to himself, saying it couldn't be real. Misunderstanding Li's muttering, the master believed he had been insulted, thinking Li had just called him Fart Master. In an instant, the grim tension twisted into something darkly absurd, but as the master approached, his body began to disintegrate into the air. In that instant, Li's eyes snapped open. He found himself lying in a hospital bed, strapped down and breathing heavily. Sometime later, a doctor appeared and sat beside him, calmly asking how he was feeling after experiencing the illusions. Li, still disoriented, explained that everything had happened the same way again. Same environment, same actions. Li recounted the latest illusion, describing how he saw the master cruelly killing someone in front of him and using that person's body to refine pills. As Li spoke, the doctor took detailed notes. When Li asked if the illusions had any meaning or symbolism, the doctor dismissed the concern. He told Li that the content wasn't what mattered. The duration of the illusions and Li's mental stability were far more important. Before leaving, the doctor reminded him firmly that nothing in those illusions was real, and that Li had to avoid becoming emotionally entangled in them. He emphasized the importance of playing along with the plot in the illusion, as it was the only way Li could be discharged from the hospital sooner. Just as the doctor was leaving, a girl entered the room. Li was surprised to see her. It was young Na, his childhood sweetheart. She gently told him to listen to the doctor and behave. Sitting beside him, she noticed an odd smile on Li's face and jokingly told him it looked ugly. Then, she pulled out some review material from her bag. It had been personally assigned by the teacher to help Li prepare for his Year 6 entrance exams. Li, clearly unenthusiastic, asked if this was her way of getting back at him. In response, she playfully hit him on the head. As he skimmed through the notes, young Na mentioned that she had brought something else for him. She revealed a Nintendo Switch. Li eagerly reached for it, but she pulled it back, insisting he call her Big Sister first. Smirking, he leaned in close and called her Sis. As she got distracted, he quickly snatched the device and leaned back on the bed, thanking her and saying that being in the mental hospital had been unbearably boring. Seeing how happy he looked, young Na warned him not to spend all his time playing and reminded him to keep up with his homework. She then asked if he remembered the promise he made to her. Li nodded and moved closer to her, gently reminding her that they had agreed to go to the same college. He hugged her, promising he would recover. In return, she embraced him tightly and said she would wait for him. Later, as young Na prepared to leave, Li offered to walk her to the hospital gate. Just as Li was about to put on his slippers, something unexpected happened. He suddenly felt a sharp, unbearable pain in his head. Struggling to stay upright, he clung to the table for support. That's when he noticed a medicine pestle sitting on the table. He tried to compose himself, telling himself it wasn't possible for those things to exist in reality. Sensing something was wrong, young Na asked if he was okay. Li, lost in thought, questioned why this was happening even though he had been following the doctor's instructions. Regaining his composure, he asked young Na if he had scared her with his acting. Annoyed by his behavior, she called him childish and began to leave. Li hesitated for a moment, then looked back at the desk once more, unsure whether his eyes were playing tricks on him. Choosing to ignore it, he ran after her, calling for her to wait. When they were outside the hospital, he apologized and explained that he only wanted to make her happy. But something strange caught his attention again. The people around him were acting exactly like those from the cave in his hallucinations. He tried to dismiss it and walked up behind young Na, wondering if she was intentionally ignoring him. Just then, she placed a finger on his cheek in a playful gesture, perhaps mimicking the way Li had scared her earlier. But what she didn't realize was that Li hadn't been pretending. What he had experienced was real to him.
Nana walked out through the hospital gate, waving goodbye. He stood there watching until she disappeared from view. Afterward, Li returned to his room inside the hospital. As he walked, his thoughts kept returning to the medicine pestle he had seen earlier. Talking to himself, he began to fear that if his mental state continued to deteriorate, he might not be able to attend college with Nana. That meant the promise he had made to her could be broken. He raised his hand and shouted in frustration, saying he was going to go completely insane living in a place surrounded by mad people. He cried out that they had locked him up in a mental hospital, but midway through his shouting, he felt something strange in his pocket. Curious, he reached inside and wondered aloud what it could be. He hadn't put anything in there. When he pulled the object out, he was shocked. It was the same candy that the girl from his hallucination had given him. The thought terrified him. Speaking to himself, He confirmed it was the exact same candy, then questioned how it could possibly exist in the real world, to test whether it was real. He picked it up with his fingers and cautiously placed it in his mouth. Upon tasting it, he felt the flavor on his tongue, which deeply disturbed him. This strange experience convinced Lee that perhaps his hallucinations were beginning to materialize in reality. Feeling a surge of urgency, he ran toward the doctor with the candy, thinking that if the doctor saw it, maybe others would stop calling him crazy. Speaking to himself, he said this might actually be a good opportunity. His expression shifted, his eyes began to glow faintly in the darkness, and his face took on a disturbing, almost monstrous look. He whispered to himself that if he could find things in the hallucination world and bring them back, it could work in his favor. It was clear now that he had formed a plan. That was why he didn't go to the doctor. He chose not to tell anyone about it. The story then shifted back to the hallucination, where Lee had gathered everyone in the cave. He asked them if they had any money. When no one responded, he explained that he needed gold, silver, or jade pendants from them, since they couldn't spend them in there. He suggested that they let him borrow them. To his disappointment, none of them responded, which led him to think that these drug addicts didn't have anything of value. Just as he was about to give up, he heard a voice calling out to him. It was the woman he had saved from the disciple earlier, and she asked him to follow her. After leading him to a quiet spot, Lee asked what she needed. The woman began to remove a gold anklet from her leg and asked if it was good enough for him. She handed it to him, and after examining the anklet, he noticed that it was a little thin, but still had some weight to it. He put it away, telling the woman that he would borrow the gold anklet for a while and return it to her later. He then handed her a candy cane, telling her it was edible and sweet. Meanwhile, the rest of the disciples were spying on them from a distance. Seeing them act this way, they commented that they were hoping for something worth watching, but this was no fun. As they were doing this, the man from earlier arrived and asked what they were doing. Hearing his voice, all of them started to run away. As they fled, he called out to Lee, telling him it was unfortunate that he couldn't be used as a medicinal ingredient for the master. Lee kept silent, remembering that the man's name was Xunyang. Seeing no answer, the man began to leave. He instructed Lee to go back to work and warned him that if he didn't get the master's medicine right, he would skin him alive. As he was leaving, Lee noticed a jade pendant on the man and wondered if it was an antique. He started to smile, thinking that soon it would be his. The story fast-forwarded to the dead of night. Lee was coming out of the cave, relieved that everything had gone smoothly since Shen wasn't in his cave tonight. In his hand was the jade pendant. He started to think that if he could take it out into the real world, he could sell it to make some money to cover his and Nana's college tuition fees. After that, he started to leave, humming happily. After walking for a bit, he noticed a light ahead and began to wonder if someone was up front, as he was lost in thought. Lee was startled when Xinyang appeared behind him and asked what he was doing out there at such an hour. Terrified, Lee turned to face him and tried to explain his situation. However, Xinyang calmly asked why he was wearing the medicine servant's clothes. Without saying another word, Xinyang began to drag him along, explaining that they were escaping from this wretched place and that the guard had already been dealt with. Lee was surprised and hesitated for a moment, only to be struck in the throat. And pinned against the wall, Xinyang told him that if he didn't want to come with them, he could just die there, as they weren't planning to leave him behind alive to tip off the master. Seeing the situation unfold, he reassured himself that there was no need to worry, since he could always return to the hospital. He closed his eyes to focus, and soon woke up back on his hospital bed. Realizing that he was tied to the bed, Lee didn't struggle, assuming the nurse was probably asleep. There was no way for him to check if the jade pendant and the gold anklet had come along with him, so he decided to return to the hallucination. Regaining consciousness in that world, he noticed that everyone had left, and he was alone. Confident that there was no way they could hurt him in his own hallucinations, he felt at ease. As morning arrived, a man was seen running inside the cave, shouting for everyone to wake up because the master had ordered them to gather at Huan Hall. Hearing his voice, everyone began to stir and wondered what was going on, though they had a sense of what it was about. After some time, they all gathered in the hall, and once they were assembled, the master began to approach. He wondered what the master was planning now. The master addressed everyone and informed them that, At 3 a.m. the previous night, some people, including 2 of his personal disciples, had attempted to escape. He expressed his deep disappointment and reminded them of the Xiandingu sect's rules, rewards for merit and punishment for transgressions. Among the crowd, Xinyang noticed Li and attempted to ask for help. Seeing him in this state, Li thought he looked pathetic for getting caught so easily. The master used his powers to lift everyone into the air and uttered the word "open," causing a massive hole to appear in the ground. Terrified, Li tried to convince himself that it was all just a hallucination and that everything in this place was created by his own mind. As he listened to the screams of the victims behind him, he became lost in thought until he noticed something moving past him. It was a massive tentacle that snatched one of the people standing beside him. Li wondered what the creature was and whether he had created it within his hallucination. The master told everyone in the hall to remember what they saw that day, emphasizing that helping someone become an immortal was a great merit. He promised that when he ascended to immortality, he would never forget their kindness. He then stopped next to Li and asked why he hadn't left with the traitors the previous night when they invited him to escape. Li stood there in horror, repeatedly telling himself that this was only an illusion and that he must not be afraid. The master placed his hand on Li's head and praised him for doing well. As he turned to leave, he told Li that he was quite talented and that from now he would become the master's official disciple, and his new job would be to manage the supply room. Li was surprised and thought that he had been elevated to a higher position only because he didn't help them escape. However, he soon realized it was actually because too many people had died and the master didn't have enough help. He heard the master saying that since Li had become his disciple, he couldn't live without a Taoist name, so he gave him the name Xinyong. Upon hearing those words, Li was amused, thinking that the last person named Xinyong had just died, and he wondered if he would end up the same way. As he was lost in thought, the master tossed a pouch into his hands, telling him the 5 pills. Inside were immortal elixirs. He had refined himself. He explained that the pills would add 10 years to his life and also increase his strength. After that, he raised his voice and announced to everyone else in the hall that going against him would lead to a dead end, but anyone who helped him would be rewarded. Meanwhile, Li stared at the elixirs, wondering if they had been refined using human ingredients. Fast forward, Li was later seen sitting on his hospital bed, thinking to himself that he had managed to bring everything out from his hallucination. Now, he needed to verify the authenticity of the jade pendant and gold bracelet. If both items were real, that meant the elixir might also have an effect. He considered trying one of the pills, but before he could, Yang SL slammed open the door. She told him that she had skipped class and had to sneak outside by climbing over the wall, so he better have something important to say. Seeing her there, Li began to scan his surroundings, then closed the door and drew the curtains. Seeing him act like this, Yang got the wrong idea and asked why he was pulling the curtains, reminding him that the nurse's station could still hear them. Just then, a voice came from the speaker in the room, saying they couldn't hear anything and encouraging them to continue whatever they were doing. Li quietly placed something into Yang's hand and told the person on the speaker to stop being nosy and to focus extra attention on the ICU. Yang asked what the item was, and Li whispered in her ear, telling her not to make a sound. He then explained everything to her. Fast forward a few days, Li was sitting on his bed, reflecting on how even his own parents didn't believe him and thought he was crazy. Yang SL was his only savior. She was the only one willing to listen. As he was deep in thought, he heard the woman on the speaker announce that his girlfriend had arrived to see him. He got up to meet her and noticed some guards approaching. When he asked what was going on, one of the men informed him to close his door and not come out for a while. If he saw old Liu, he was to report immediately. As the old man had sneaked out of his room, wondered how a frail old man could have escaped from the critical care ward, but decided to ignore it since it was none of his business. He continued on to see Yang. Later, the 2 of them were seen outside, and Yang told him she had someone appraise the jade pendant and gold bracelet. As he had claimed, the jade pendant was an authentic antique, and its estimated value was no less than 400,000 yuan. The bracelet was also confirmed to be real gold. Upon hearing that, Li told her it was exactly as he thought and that he wasn't crazy. In his excitement, Li grabbed Yang, shouting that he wasn't crazy. After that, the boundary between the world of illusion and reality began to merge. They were later seen walking around, and Li told her that his abilities were real, so he should be cured too quickly. He then asked if she was ready to become a rich lady. However, Yang punched him, scolding him, and asking what nonsense he was talking about. She explained that she didn't want money, his health was far more important than any kind of ability. She made him promise that he would continue his treatment and not stop taking his medicines. Otherwise, she said she wouldn't help him anymore. Li promised her, but both of them failed to realize that someone was approaching from behind. A man suddenly grabbed Yang, shocking them both, and pinned her to the ground. Li recognized the person as Lu, the one the guards had been looking for. He started running toward Lu, telling him to stop, but Lu hit him on the head with a rock, causing Li to fall to the ground. He tried to plead with Lu to stop, and in that moment, he remembered the master from his hallucinations and the elixir that granted temporary strength. He saw Yang, who was still worried, and asking if he was all right. She then saw Li eat one of the refined balls. A massive surge of energy coursed through his body. With non-human speed, he leaped toward Lu, and before Lu could react, Li grabbed his face and smashed him to the ground, crushing his skull with his bare hands. Some time later, Li was seen tied up with chains inside the dangerous patient confinement room, trying to explain that he was only fighting back. He told the doctor that he was protecting Yang from Lu. However, the doctor told him that the way he handled the situation didn't look like mere self-defense, and asked him to tell the truth about how he was able to hurt Lu so badly using just his hands. Li hesitated, so the doctor warned him to think carefully before answering, saying he hated it the most when patients lied to him. Seeing the doctor's expression, Li began thinking of a way to get out of the situation, as he couldn't reveal the truth about the elixir. He closed his eyes to enter the world of illusion and saw the doctor trying to wake him up. After that, he woke up in the illusionary world, thinking that this might be his only solution. In a time skip, he was seen inside a temple with the master and his disciples, who were praying in front of a massive statue. The master informed everyone in the room that Li had just joined their Qingfeng temple, so there was a lot he didn't yet understand. He then instructed one of the senior disciples to teach Li everything he needed to know. After that, the master told everyone to go and have dinner. However, a man sitting next to Li was staring at him with suspicious eyes. Li began to wonder who that person was and why he was looking at him like that. Later, both of them were seen walking down a staircase, and the person assigned to guide Li told him that the man next to the master was Senior Yanu. He explained that ever since Senior Jainin and Jiang Xin had betrayed the sect, Yanu had become the master's only remaining inner disciple. He advised Li to show respect to anyone he met within the temple from that point on, and warned him that Yanu could be really petty. Li responded that he had just become the master's disciple, so he didn't know anything about what he was supposed to do. He asked the guide to clarify things for him. Li recalled that when the master had first accepted him as a disciple, he had been assigned the task of managing the fly room. At the time, the master had warned him that if Li truly wished to learn the path to immortality, he was still far from being worthy. Li had been surprised and asked whether the master truly had the ability to teach him how to become immortal. The man had calmly told him not to get too excited, explaining that while the master's powers were undoubtedly formidable, the actual path to immortality was likely known only to the inner disciple, someone like Senior Junu at that point. Li began to doubt the man's words, suspecting they were all just fictional tales, lies invented by the master himself. He realized he needed to find another way to extract more money from this place. The scene then transitioned to the Qingfeng Temple's alchemy room. Inside, the master was refining a pill with the assistance of his disciples. As the pill emerged from the clay hearth, the master brought out a magical bottle that began to absorb the pill on its own. Li, who was present and observing closely, initially believed his only goal was to make money. However, he soon realized there was much more to this world. If he could bring this magical ability into the real world, it would be extraordinary. Just as he was deep in thought, the master suddenly called out his name. Startled, Li asked what the master needed him to do. As he responded, he couldn't help but think that perhaps this old man truly could teach him everything. The master then asked Li to bring him an herbal primer called by Ling Miao. Upon hearing the name, Li froze. He was reminded of the disturbing image of women being transformed into those very pills the last time he had visited the master. Noticing Li's hesitation, the master stepped closer, asking sternly if he hadn't heard the instruction. Frightened, Li instinctively shut his eyes in an attempt to return to reality. When Li opened his eyes, he found himself back in the hospital with the doctor and his mother standing beside his bed. His mother, alarmed, asked what had happened to his head and why it was wrapped up. Li reassured her, saying that it didn't hurt and there was no need to worry. Seeing how frail he looked, his mother reached into her bag and commented that he had lost weight. She asked if the hospital food had been bad, then took out his favorite great milk candy. Li told her she didn't need to go out of her way for him, but she just smiled and said she was relieved he had woken up. She then mentioned that the doctor was about to take her to meet the family of the old man who had attacked him. Li quickly explained that he had only been defending himself and that the old man had attacked first. His mother assured him that the doctor had already told her everything that had happened and that she was on his side. Her support moved Li emotionally. As she was preparing to leave, she reminded him to listen to the doctor and take his medicine on time. Just as she reached the door, Li called out to her one last time. She turned back with a fiery determination, in her eyes clearly ready to confront the old man's family. Watching her, Li felt certain she was going to give them a serious scolding. But then his head started to spin. He felt his consciousness drifting back to the other world. As the vision faded, he saw the doctor telling him they could continue their conversation later. Li thought to himself that they could finish their talk the next time he returned. As he regained consciousness on the other side, he saw a foot planted in front of him. Looking up, he saw the master standing there, holding something in his hand. Li, still disoriented, began to wonder if the matter regarding the Ling Miao pill refinement had already been resolved. He remained lost in thought. That's it for chapters 1 to 10 of Dao of the Bizarre Immortal. The journey has just begun, and things are only going to get stranger from here. What secrets await? Who can be trusted? And how far will our immortal go to escape fate? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next update. Comment your thoughts below. The Dao is full of twists, and your theories might just be right. Stay bizarre.